Bringing you full coverage of the results in Ireland's landmark referendum on abortion. Counting is underway as exit polls suggest a landslide result for the Yes campaign in favour of legalising abortion. We'll bring you the results as they come in. Plus, we're live in Letterkenny, a town more than 100 miles from Dublin, to gauge the reaction in the communities which have been divided by this decision.
Also ahead this morning, the disappointment of more than 1,000 Liverpool fans after cancelled flights mean they'll miss tonight's Champions League final. We'll have a special report from Hawaii as authorities reveal that more than 2,000 acres of land has now been covered by lava from the island's Kilauea volcano. The rising price of supermarket fuel. New figures show pump prices have gone up every single day since the end of March. An utter failure. MPs condemn a scheme to help Afghan civilians who worked as interpreters for British forces. And why a leading employment specialist thinks obese people should be allowed to arrive late for work.
Good morning, this is Sky News live from Dublin Castle. It's here where the results in Ireland's historic abortion referendum will be announced later on today. Judging by two exit polls released last night, voters here have overwhelmingly voted to liberalise strict abortion laws. Within the last few seconds, we're just hearing that Save the Eighth have conceded that they have lost. Save the Eighth have said via the Reuters news agency that they have lost this referendum. Counting your votes is underway, of course. Let's take a look at how emphatic those polls were. Here we go. In the first exit poll released by Ipsos MRBI for the Irish Times, 68% of people said they voted to liberalise abortion. 32% said that they opposed it. And an exit poll conducted on behalf of Ireland's national broadcaster RTE also showed a big win for the Yes campaign. 69.4% of people saying they voted yes to repealing the Eighth Amendment. In just a moment, we will be crossing down to Donegal to speak to Darren McCaffrey. But first, let's bring in Beth Rigby, who's at account just down the road from us here in Dublin. Save the Eighth have conceded, Beth.
They're on a break, aren't they?
Nope.
I can't hear them.
Beth can't hear me just at the moment either, so we'll be speaking in just a moment or two to David Blevins, who's joining us now. Hi, David. Save the Eighth conceded.
Yes, not surprising on the basis of those exit polls indicating a landslide result, a staggering result really for the people who'd campaigned for the lifting of the constitutional ban on abortion in this country. And it certainly gives the Taoiseach, the Irish Prime Minister, an overwhelming mandate to legislate. That's probably going to happen before the end of this year now on the basis of this result. Leo Varadkar himself personally changed his mind on this emotive issue and then persuaded his cabinet to come with him on this journey, call this referendum. But no one really saw this margin of victory for those who were campaigning for a repeal of the Eighth Amendment, that constitutional ban on abortion in this country, Kay.
Yeah, just looking at the statement from John McGurk from the Save the Eighth campaign, as you know, the anti-abortion group. He says that they have accepted that they have lost this referendum. They've obviously looked at the polls, they've had an idea of what's happening since the counting started at 9 o'clock, and they've thrown in the towel. Yes,
the polling in advance of the referendum suggested that there were somewhere in the region of 16% of the electorate undecided, and people speculated perhaps that that was a silent no. Actually, it turned out to be a silent yes, and in fact I'd go further and suggest that some of those who had planned to vote no were persuaded by the very personal stories being told by women who had painful experience of having to travel from Ireland to access abortion, in many cases because of fatal fetal abnormality, that their children were not going to survive
home to
beyond
vote.
birth.
Sorry to interrupt, David. I thought you'd finish. Home to vote made a big difference as well, I guess.
It did. They really got people to come back in significant number. At Dublin Airport, we were talking particularly to young women who travelled from Barcelona, from Amsterdam, from New York, from all over the world, really, back home, the sons and daughters of Ireland, to make sure their vote counted in this referendum. And my goodness, it appears to have been a worthwhile journey for those who came home to vote yes. If these figures are right, these exit poll figures, and I've no reason to doubt that, Kay, then this country has changed beyond all recognition. The days of us talking about Catholic Ireland well and truly are gone. The country has now legalised contraception, divorce, same-sex marriage and abortion, and all in the space of just 40 years.
OK, let's have a quick look at the papers, should we? And then we'll bring in Darren McCaffrey, who's in Letterkenny. But this is the Irish Independent on Saturday. I'm sure there was a lot of scrambling going on in the newsrooms, David. It's a yes, says the Irish Independent on Saturday. First exit polls were in at 10 o'clock last night. It's a great big yes, says the Irish Daily Star. The Weekend Herald, reflecting on tonight's football game as well, lots of Liverpool fans here in Dublin, but also it's a yes, says the Weekend Herald. And this was one of the 2 opinion polls that we're reflecting on so far today. This is the Irish Times Weekend, 68% according to their poll, voting in favour of repealing the 8th, 32% saying no. We heard from the Just Say No campaign just a few moments ago, and they have conceded defeat. Darren McCaffrey, as I said, down in County Donegal for us. Paint the picture where you are, if you would, please, Darren.
I have to say, of course, it is very early here in Donegal, but it may well buck the national trend, Kay. There are suggestions, looking at the early indications and tallies of all the counting that's taking place behind me, that Donegal may well vote no, or at least at the moment that it's pretty close. It is not going to be like we've seen in those exit polls, or indeed the national mood, which seems to suggest that 2/3 of voters will have backed the yes vote to repeal the amendment of the Constitution. Here in the northwest of Ireland, in many regards we couldn't be further away from Dublin, it looks like people are much more evenly divided. At the moment, I'm being told the early indications show that the no vote is edging it, not just in the rural areas, but also potentially in some of the towns as well. Let's go and talk, if we can, to Piers Doherty. He is Sinn Féin TD, one of the local members of Parliament here. Piers, it does look like it's going to be pretty close here in Donegal, doesn't it?
It does, and that probably reflects what we were hearing in the conversations we were having on the doorstep. But you have to also put this in context that Donegal 35 years ago voted to 83% to insert the 8th Amendment into the Constitution, and there's no doubt that there has been a seismic shift in opinion since those decades have passed, and that's down in the main, in my view, to the stories of those women who have been affected by the 8th Amendment, who have been let down by the 8th Amendment. And what we're seeing nationally, and including Donegal, is that there is a huge number of people coming out and saying that they do not stand for an Ireland anymore that criminalises tragedy.
But how do you feel that the message that seems to have resonated with voters elsewhere in the country doesn't quite seem to have cut through here?
Oh, well, I wouldn't accept that at all. I think you're seeing tens of thousands of people come out and support the message from Together to Yes, asking for the repeal of the 8th Amendment. We recognised in Donegal that we were starting from probably a lower base, a bigger challenge as one of the counties, as the county which had the most strong support for the 8th Amendment originally. And the fact now that we're seeing tallies that shows that it is neck and neck at this point in time. It's still early days. There is only 2 of the 5 electoral areas being tallied here. So I'm still hopeful that we will be able to have a yes vote. But most important is that nationally the people have spoken, and the 8th Amendment will now be a thing of the past, and it's now our duty as legislators to legislate for a compassionate and caring legislation that has women's health at the centre.
But would you be disappointed if this turned out to be the only, or if one of the only counties to vote now?
Oh, well, look, I and my party and with Together for Yes have been campaigning for this issue. I think, nobody out there a number of months ago, a number of years ago, would have expected Donegal to be voting yes, indeed to be actually where we are today, where it is neck and neck. The fact that the message has resonated with so many people, the fact that so many people have turned and said that we care, that we have compassion, but also recognise that the no vote had very strong, deeply held views in relation to this year, and that also needs to be taken into account. But we're part of a national election at this point in time, and I'm quite glad of the trends that we're seeing this morning, and I'm hopeful that Donegal will return a yes vote when all the votes are counted.
Great. Piers Doherty, thank you very much. Piers Doherty there, one of the Sinn Féin TDs here in Donegal. I think ultimately, Kay, as Piers was rightly saying there, that even yesterday, the day before, if this vote was going to be close, people would have expected Donegal to vote no. This is a relatively conservative rural part of Ireland. However, given how big that national gap is when you look at the exit polls, I think when I turned up this morning, when the Yes campaigners turned up this morning, they thought that Donegal would also vote yes. But it looks like this may be one of the few counties, maybe the only county, as I say, it is still early doors that may well have voted no, bucking that national trend.
OK, for now, thank you. Just hearing that the Taoiseach's polling station at Laurel Lodge in Castleknock has been tallied. 74% were told in favour of getting rid of the 8th Amendment. 3/4 at the Taoiseach's polling station saying no more for the 8th Amendment. Let's bring in Beth Rigby, our senior political correspondent, who is at a counting centre in Dublin for us. Atmosphere where you are, Beth.
Well, Kay, what you just said about Leo Varadkar's constituency or polling station, that big poll of 74%, it feels very, very repealy here. Hundreds of volunteers and activists have descended on the polling count in Dublin to come and celebrate. There's been tears of joy, there's hugs, there is palpable delight in the room, Kay, I can tell you. It's got a very good atmosphere here. And Richard Bruton, the education minister, I spoke to him earlier, he said even the bookies didn't predict this sort of result for yes in those exit polls. This is what he had to say to me when I caught up with him a bit earlier.
I think we would have been putting it in 55 to 60 would have been the sort of number that people were thinking would be the outcome. This has clearly exceeded most expectations. I think even the bookies wouldn't have been betting on this.
So that was the repeal side, but Cara Sherlock, she is one of the lead figures in the No campaign. She was also here this morning. I spoke to her just a few minutes ago and I asked her how she was feeling. She said this was a sad and serious day for Ireland, that she was very disappointed and surprised by the scale of support for the repeal side. And she said crucially too that for those on the no side, and remember that the exit poll is saying that 1 in 3 Irish people do not want to legalise abortion here in Ireland. She said for the no side, the government had to take that group of people with them, that she wanted more details on how the Irish government would prevent what she called a spike in abortion that she expects to see now that there has been the decision to repeal, or the expected decision, should I say, to repeal the 8th Amendment. So jubilation in this hall, Kay, with this is the repeal stronghold we know Dublin is, but there are vote no people out here today. And it was a very divisive referendum, and a big chunk of the population are deeply disappointed by the result.
OK, Beth, for now, thank you. So the Save the 8th Vote No campaign have conceded within the last few moments. And we can also tell you that the Irish PM's constituency counts 75% in favour of repealing the 8th Amendment. Earlier, I spoke to the Dublin City Councillor, Rebecca Moynihan, who supported the Yes campaign.
Well, I think it's a very good day for the women of Ireland. It's been a very long fought for campaign. The 8th Amendment went in 1983. We've had 6 abortion referendums since then. This is the first time that we've ever had a chance to take out the 8th Amendment. This is the first time anything like that is ever proposed. And I think you see from the exit polls and the results, which was overwhelming, unexpected. I certainly didn't expect it from knocking on doors. The Irish people listened to the stories of real women. And we had women getting up and telling really sad stories about their journeys and their travels and the situations that they were forced into and how their health was compromised. So I think this is a really good result for the women of Ireland.
That was from the Vote Yes campaign, Repeal the 8th. This was the reaction from the Deputy Chairperson for the Pro-Life campaign, Cara Sherlock.
What we're going to do at this stage is we're going to hold the government to what they have said, and what they have said is that this is restrictive abortion, and what they've said is that this will not impact on babies who are diagnosed with a disability in the womb, and they must stand over that because there's a lot of people who would have voted for this referendum believing them. So we will very much hold to that, and I want to take this opportunity to thank all the amazing people around the country who worked so hard on such a fantastic campaign to protect babies in the womb and mothers and fathers who've been left out of this discussion to a large part. We'll move forward, we'll regroup, and we will continue to protect the most vulnerable among us.
Independent newspapers, Derval MacDonald. Hello to you, Derval. Thanks
Good morning.
For joining us on Sky News this morning. A surprise?
Not a surprise that it passed, but a surprise that it passed so comprehensively. I think earlier this week there was a quiet hope and an optimism that the yes side would prevail, but even those most experienced of pundits were saying that if it did, it would be 53, 54%, perhaps 56% at the most. Nobody, I think, would have anticipated that almost 7 out of 10 voters in the Republic of Ireland would have voted in favour to repeal the 8th Amendment. So I think that the sheer weight of that, the emphatic result across those two polls is something that has really surprised people, but perhaps not actually as well, because this was a grassroots campaign, and sometimes I think we in the media are out of step with what is happening on the ground. And really, this was
Brexit.
Hey, and you know, really, this was something that was divisive amongst families, amongst friends. It was a difficult issue to talk about, and everyone, I think, when they predicted that mass of undecided votes that are always critical in Irish referendum, we do them more than you do. Usually in Ireland, where people are undecided or they're not sure, they vote no. But this time around, there was a silent majority, but that silent majority said yes. And I think that is something that we will really be taking in as we meet here on this glorious day. And just behind us, in just a couple of hours, you're going to see extraordinary scenes as thousands gather here to see those poll results finally counted.
Sometimes your government does polls until they get the result that they want, as we've seen previously. Nevertheless, 1 in 3 have, if this poll is correct, these two exit polls are correct, 1 in 3 has said no, we don't want that to happen. The Taoiseach is going to have to be mindful of that.
We are, but I think we have to be mindful of that. Again, it was 4 out of 10 voters who voted no to marriage equality just 3 years ago. But I think it's all about how we have that conversation and how we are inclusive about that. I actually thought that it was the 12 weeks, which was the proposed legislation, the unrestricted access to 12 weeks. I actually thought that if anything was going to sink this referendum, it would have been that, because people seem to be a little bit uncomfortable around those particular time limits. But really, what it was about, Kay, was story. Some of the polls are indicating that when we do a deep dive into why people voted in the manner that they did, in the numbers that they did, 75% of people voted because they were affected by the personal stories of Irish women and Irish men coming forward to discuss how the 8th affected them. Those who travelled predominantly but not exclusively to the UK, those women who had experienced fatal fetal abnormality pregnancies, and then that a lot of women were demonised for accessing so-called social abortions. But the vast majority of women travel for a multitude of reasons. And I suppose it was the courage of those women coming forward in a society that has traditionally really censored discussion around reproductive rights and around autonomy. They came forward, they told their stories, and people really listened. And I think that is what has changed, is that people listened. And everybody thought that the only age cohort that voted no was the older age group. But even within that, you know, people in their 40s and in their 50s, people have a memory. I think there were a lot of stories, but more critically, I think a lot of people in Ireland had their own backstories that they perhaps contemplated this time.
You're from Northern Ireland, a woman from Northern Ireland. What does this mean for women and potential parents from Northern Ireland?
Well, this is extraordinary. So Northern Ireland, where I'm from, is constitutionally, it's part of the United Kingdom. But what people sometimes don't understand is that the 1967 Abortion Act in the UK was never applied to Northern Ireland. So now women in Northern Ireland have the title of actually living in a jurisdiction where they have the most restrictive abortion regime, because they're now very separate from their brothers and sisters in the Republic of Ireland. But critically, once legislation passes, as it is expected to do, those women, I just live an hour and a half from here, and women in Northern Ireland will be able to come from across the border to access safe and lawful termination of pregnancy in the Republic of Ireland. So it's going to have a huge impact on women across the island, and particularly, I suppose, even in a post-Brexit context, and when we're talking about a hard border. Up until now, women from Northern Ireland have had to travel across the Irish Sea. Now they'll be able to travel across the border.
OK, for now. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Gamal, 170,000 women have travelled from Ireland overseas, mostly to the United Kingdom, since the 8th was put in place in the early 1980s to have an abortion. The Save the 8th campaign have accepted that they have lost. Those two exit polls showed that almost 70% of those that were eligible for to vote felt that they wanted that to be repealed. It could be law by the end of the year. We'll have to wait to hear from the Taoiseach. I'm sure he will have something to say later on today. But for now, back to you. We're expecting the official result, Gamal, I should say, mid-afternoon.
OK, Kate, many thanks indeed. In our other news today, and Liverpool play Real Madrid tonight in the Champions League final. But any success is likely to be tainted for some fans. That's because around 1,000 supporters who'd booked to travel to Kiev have had their flights unexpectedly cancelled by their travel operators. The host city is exploring ways to help transport some of the disappointed fans, but many now look set to